Welcome to Plan 9 Crunch. My name is Doug Gibson, and today we are talking to Angel Scott, who is the author of Drown the Devil, a spiritual biography of Ed Wood, published by Bear Manor Media. There has been so much done about Ed Wood. I'm 61 years old, and I remember back in the old days, we'd pick up a Danny Perry book called Cult Films and read about Plan 9 from outer space, and you'd think about 5 or 6 movies, and now you're thinking about a guy's work that even goes into what I consider to be distasteful, but still fascinating.
Yes.
So, so a spiritual biography is very interesting because I don't think people associate Ed with spirituality a lot of times, although there are anecdotes like the Baptists, helping the movie. I'm talking too much. Tell me, you're a pastor. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm not quite 50 yet, which is awesome. So I'm still enjoying my 40s. I became a pastor about 10 years ago here in the Midwest, and believe it or not, the way I met and kind of got to know my husband was watching Mystery Science Theater 3000, and we happened to go to a Mads are Back show, and um, that's kind of the origins of my Ed Wood book. But other than that, I'm a mom of twins, and I just kind of work from home, preaching the gospel, and uh, watching B movies in my free time. So
Oh, I know.
yeah.
Tell me when you said you that introduced you to Ed Wood, but what was the thing that made you think I'm an Ed Wood fan? I might one day write a book about him.
Yeah, that was really weird because, to be honest with you, I had maybe once or twice heard of Ed Wood back in the 90s when the Tim Burton biopic came out, but I paid absolutely no attention to that at the time. And so when I finally go see this Mads are Back show in Woodbury, Minnesota, about what, 7 years ago or something, I was to watch Glenn or Glenda being riffed. And I had never seen Bride of the Monster. I'd never seen it, even Plan 9 from Outer Space. And so I remember watching Glenn or Glenda, and I was just like, wow, this is the worst theological like understanding of the Bible that I've ever seen in my entire life. And so I was just appalled at what was going on. And Ed Wood actually brings up a lot of interesting points about how people are spiritually abused by moralists, and so I really kind of latched onto that with my own Lutheran theology because I believe the same thing. I believe that moralism is why people hate Christianity. They think that we're a bunch of snobby, do-gooders, and it's just like, well, we try to do good, and rules are helpful, but that's not what the gospel is. So that was kind of my entryway into Ed Wood was watching Glenn or Glenda,
Well,
and
that's interesting because in Glinda, there's that falsetto voice of a woman saying, "If the Creator had wanted us to do this, and then there's a guy talking to his coworkers saying, "Well, maybe we should understand these people more." So that
yes,
must have intrigued you, right, to see those kind of parts in this Grade Z movie, right?
it did. And of course, Bela Lugosi's character totally fascinated me because, people think of Bela Lugosi, they think of a horror movie, a monster. But when I was watching, I'm like, wow, he's playing God. This is cool. um, and so I really wanted to speak about that and how Ed Wood brought his faith into his work, which had never been done before. I mean, there's tons of stuff about all of his movies, about him wearing Angora sweaters and lacy underwear and all these sorts of things. And I'm like, but what about his religious and spiritual upbringing, and how did that impact his artist and his work? Yeah.
Talk about that. Talk about you did some research into the family and their religious background and what Ed Wood, how he went to church and what he did. Explain to some of our readers about that.
Sure. So, one of our from the Facebook Ed Wood page, of course, we all know that Greg does a lot of posts about Ed's getting into his genealogy and things like that and the census records. And so I looked at a lot of that. But I said to myself, one of the things that's missing here is church records. We don't have any church records. And so I actually started picking through the Poughkeepsie Journal and things like that on newspaper.com. And I found out where Ed actually went to church and, where his parents were married. And so I started making some phone calls and sending some emails, contacting the different churches there. And I finally found the baptismal records for Ed Wood, which is something that had never been found before. And I'm like, people need to know about this. And so I latched on to that particular record. I also found things, funerals for his family members later in life, in the same congregation. I just thought that was interesting that the family stayed at Heading Methodist Church their whole lives. So
So
from like,
they were active members, and you talk
oh,
about some of the things Ed Wood did
yeah.
in the church, and sort of some of it foreshadowed what he tried to do in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, really interestingly enough, one of the things that I found out on newspaper.com was that he put on plays and stuff at his church, which I thought was really fascinating. And that was kind of, in my opinion, a foreshadowing of what he ended up doing with the Baptist church that we all know and love, who helped Plan 9 to be made, where he actually wrote and produced a Christmas drama in 1956. So he and Ed Reynolds got together and shot, Plan 9 from Outer Space in like 2, maybe 3 weeks. And then they produced a Christmas drama. And of course, that was advertised in the Beverly Hills newspaper and things like that. And a nice picture of Ed Wood there. But so, yeah, so that's just something that Ed Wood was really good at doing. He also produced The Casual Company, which a lot of Ed Wood fans know about. That was a play that he wrote about his time in the Marines, and The Casual Company, which is kind of a rehabilitation unit in California. He did really well. He said, playing that for the audiences in the military, but it didn't translate so well to a civilian population.
I remember
I've
reading that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny if you understand military life and have some connection to that, but if you don't, you're like, I have no idea what's going on here. I'm actually in the National Guard, so I can relate to some of the things there, right down
You
to the
know,
guy's pants being practically threads before he's able to get a replacement. I'm like, yeah, I know what that's like. Um,
a lot of there used to be a lot of disinformation, not intentional, I'm sure, about Ed Wood's military service. And then the book came out by Pontalila or something like that, I think his
yeah.
name. And so Ed's military experience was basically more non-combat, right, to
Mhm.
some degree. And do you think that had any effect on how? Because he went back to Poughkeepsie, right, and started becoming involved in veterans organizations.
Yes.
Was he trying to follow a family tradition with that, or was he motivated by himself? Do you think to do that kind of stuff?
I think part of it was family tradition. His father was the commander of the local VFW for several years and on several different occasions throughout the years. But Ed actually never joined the VFW, which he could have, since he was a veteran of a foreign war. Instead, he joined the Marine Corps League, which was specific to Marines who had served. And it was kind of strange because they didn't choose him to be the entertainment committee chair. They chose him to be the chaplain of that particular organization, and what that meant, like, Ed had to lead prayers and things like that, and visit the sick, and keep tabs on those sorts of things. Of course, he ended up trying to cheer people up through a production of The Casual Company, which helped fund the new building for the VFW, which still stands today, by the way. So his influence was there. I don't think it was really something that was super important to him, but it was part of his sociological makeup. This is what his mother did. This is what his father did. This is what all of his neighbors and friends did. So he did it. He was also a Boy Scout leader at one time as well.
Yeah. How often did Casual Company play? If you watch the Ed Wood movie, you think it played just in one place in L.A., but it played in more than one area, right? He was
Well,
trying to.
yeah, sort of. I mean, like, it played in two different venues in Poughkeepsie before Ed came to LA. And then once he got to LA, I believe it only played in one venue. It
It was
played at,
just the one place in L.A. then.
yeah, the Village Theater. Yep.
And is it really true that he basically did it for pretzels and beer?
I don't doubt it. Well,
I've seen a picture of him. Yeah.
yeah, part of
Well,
that,
Casual Company is not the pretzels and beer thing. That's the blackguard, right? But
right. Yeah. Oh, I was going to say that the Casual Company was supposed to be one of the pioneer plays for the Village Theater that he helped establish. Uh, Apparently it didn't go well.
I think you talked a little bit about the legend, I guess, that's true that someone didn't send their lead reviewer there, and gave it a bad review, and
Yeah.
and it's fun to read some of Ed's letters back to his parents because he was trying hard to be optimistic, but it
Yes.
was pretty rough when he went to Hollywood, right?
It was very rough when he went to Hollywood. He just didn't have this, if you have read his book Hollywood Rat Race,
Yeah, I have. I
where
have.
he's discouraging people from coming to Hollywood to begin with. He's like, just because you do well in front of your friends and your family, it does not mean that it's going to translate into success in Hollywood. And for him, it was really really rough, those first few years in the late 40s.
Do you think he had unrealistic expectations when he went from New York to Hollywood and he had to learn them?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 This
Um,
seems. Oh, go on, go on. I'm
oh, I
sorry.
was just gonna say that I think that Ed also had he was just one of those personalities that if you wanted to try something, he was gonna go all in, and I believe that he did that. He had a dream. He had something he wanted to achieve, and he did everything he could to make it happen. So
Yeah, I don't want to jump ahead too much, so I'm trying to keep this. And you're not jumping ahead. It's just I'm trying to, Ed. If you see a picture of Ed, and I think you've probably seen the video where he's directing this home movie for Conrad Brooks and his brother. You see a
yes,
man who's just almost bubbly and jumping up and down with enthusiasm.
yes,
And so I get the picture that might have been Ed Wood for the first few years in Hollywood. Otherwise, how would he attract a pretty impressive woman in Dolores Fuller, right?
right.
So he showed promise initially, and I think to him, Glen or Glinda was something very important to him. All
Yes.
right, and his spirituality comes out in that movie, in a sense of what you were talking about of a statement against moralism, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Extreme moralism. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that. But how do you think he might have butted heads with George Weiss or something? Did George Weiss know about all this kind of stuff, or did Weiss just think he was making a quickie to get out there on the sex change operation or something?
I honestly don't believe that that George Weiss knew the full extent of what Glenn or Glenda was going to be until he saw it.
Yeah, I'm thinking that too. And this gets to the
Yeah.
point I'm trying to make. Ed also, and I've seen the movie because I have a set over there of the films. What's his name? John Crawford? John
Thomas.
Thomas? What's his name? I can't
Yeah,
remember
I
now.
know. I always get that like mixed up too, but I know who you're
Crawford John Thomas, right? That's
yeah.
his name or something like that. So, but Ed was probably very optimistic, but then also Ed didn't seem to have the resources to say to complete what he wanted to do, right? And that may have been the first example, perhaps.
I think with Glenn or Glenda, or no, for Crossroads of Laredo, I don't feel like no, that was just like we need to make it like just a straight mainline, Western, just everything that's already been done basically, only with no budget. um, and then I don't think he really went into full artistic expression mode until he made Glen or Glenda.
Yeah, Glenn Glendo, he just basically took over everything. And talk to us a little bit about, you write about this in the book, his relationship with Dolores Fuller and how that sort of had a Christian stability in his life, what she offered him at the time.
It really did, Dolores stabilized his life in every respect, down from we're going to eat good food, we're going to, try to live some sort of healthy lifestyle. So, being well fed, which is super helpful if you're trying to, make it under stressful circumstances. But, she also had a background, a Christian background. And when it came to the potential for a long-term relationship, I can really see how um, that became part of an expression for Ed as well. The most primary example would be the Christmas cards, the 3D Christmas cards. I just love
They're
those.
amazing.
Yeah, I just can't get over those. I mean, some of them are kind of weird. I mean, if you're into like Dolores Fuller, in scantily clad Santa outfits or whatever. But then you have, Ed Wood dressed as Jesus, in a nativity scene, in a kind of a resurrection scene. I never could understand that whole resurrection card for Christmas, but it kind of makes sense. I try to make it make sense in the book, but
Until I read your book, I hadn't realized that he tried to sell those.
yeah, he actually went door to door to sell these things.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's kind of,
Uh,
yeah,
so I see this motif in all of his movies, at least for a while,
yeah,
of where the moral side will triumph, right?
yeah,
In his films, and of course the first one was Glenn, um, Glenn. The funny thing about Glenn or Glinda, which might upset activists today, is that Glenn no longer needs what he's fighting. By the end of the movie,
yeah.
and that struck me as kind of weird. If Ed is asking for some kind of morality, why is he having Glenn overcome it? Ed must have saw marriage and being faithful to your spouse perhaps more important than wearing dresses. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, Ed, I think, was conflicted his whole life about a host of different things. Um, and actually, his morality in that conflict that he experienced was working itself out way into the 1970s when he was writing his short, grotesque fiction for adult magazines. So, that was a point of contention for him for his whole life. But ultimately, I think Glenn or Glenda is the best because it's not just Ed that's, or Glenn in this case, fighting some sort of urge. It's actually Glenn asking God to overcome this problem of his, that ultimately, he wants to have a relationship with Barbara that isn't conflicted. The devil gets into the mix there a little bit, and he's like, I don't want this evilness, this evil thing about myself, my inner self, to impact my relationship with Barbara. So it's just like, to me, it's just super profound, how he
You
worked.
you should write a book on Glenn or Glinda. That'd be interesting.
Maybe I will.
But Ed had a extended family with Dolores, right? Like members of her family he could go to. Dolores is Hungarian, as is my wife, so I know about the wonderful dinners you can have of Hungarian gatherings. So he really did cleave, to use a biblical term, toward this kind of relationship, and he begged her to marry him many times, right?
Yes. And she
But I think some of the same things, some of the same values she had, and also little fears about his instability at times probably kept her from ever saying yes. What do you think of that?
Oh, I think that's spot on. She had just come out of a marriage that had children involved. And then to, be involved with Edward, I think she really loved Ed. I think there was something really powerful there. But she also realized that, like, wow, this guy can't really provide me with what I want. And because ultimately too, for her, she wanted some independence and to have a career of her own. Uh,
Hmm.
so she ended up sacrificing that a little bit when she was with Ed, um, when she was trying to help him and make his films, like, getting the wardrobes for Jailbait and that sort of stuff. It wasn't until, of course, after she left Ed that she went on to actually have a really successful career, mostly in songwriting, but not so much acting.
Yeah, did she write for Elvis Presley?
She did. Yeah.
That's, it's interesting. I don't know if I read it from you or somebody else, because I've been reading a lot of books now, but Jailbait is the one movie that people don't talk about much, but it might seem to be, along with Bride of the Monster, the most conventional film Ed Wood ever made.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I wanted to, Ed Wood tried, I get this from your book, Ed Wood wanted to be in charge of everything, all right?
Yeah.
But when he was making these films like Bride of the Monster and also Jailbait and other films, he did have people above him. I can't remember the name of the company because I always forget the name of the company when I'm on a podcast. But the people who made like Jailbait, Halco. I
Yeah.
mean, there were people above Ed Wood, and eventually you write about how the people that started AIP just did not trust Wood because of not meeting his obligations and his promises, but
Right.
they had some interest in Bride of the Monster at one time, and so he would lose. I guess I'm getting back to Dolores Fuller.
Yeah.
Did, did he let her down in that way when he decided to go for presumably a better actress in Bride of the Monster? Was that the tipping? Was that the trigger point?
That was the trigger point for those two separating for sure. Ed had had a history of problems with AIP before AIP even started.
Yeah.
Samuel Arkoff, of course, had to, when he was acting only as a lawyer, had to bail him and Gordon out of a mess that had happened earlier with Lawless Rider. Coming back to, Ed not knowing what he was doing, claiming that he had skills that he didn't actually have at the time. um, Ed was really big on fake it till you make it, and really managed to sour on Arkoff super early on, and not to his advantage. I mean, that was something that he was never able to overcome. Now, when it comes to Dolores Fuller, it was kind of the same thing. I think that there was just one too many instances where her career and her needs and wants were jeopardized and put on the back burner for his. And she finally said, you know what, my career is important too. I'm really hoping Glenn or Glenna doesn't show it like to anyone around that knows me. But then when she didn't get the lead in Bride of the Monster, she's like, wow, you don't care about what's important to me. And so I think she realized that it was more of a one-way professional thing than she was hoping. Instead of being the power couple, and going off and both succeeding and benefiting, she could see that it was just Ed Wood that was having
Well,
it.
he didn't tell her till the very end, right? I would think, because in a marriage you have to have complete trust with your spouse, and I get the feeling, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, I wasn't back there, that she didn't know till the very end she wasn't going to be in the role.
Right. I think it was like right kind of as things were coming down, uh, she didn't know. And that's why I think it ended so abruptly, was like, oh, wow. Yeah, last time you're going to mess me over, dude. So,
Yeah, and also, was the alcoholism starting to show at that time period, do you think?
well, he was still young. And so I think he was able to handle his liquor a little bit better than he obviously could, in the 1970s when he was beginning to age and it was really starting to take its toll. But, she said that, in her book, A Fuller Life, she talks about how, um, I tried to help him be clean, but I think what she ended up really teaching him was how to sneak around and
Around.
sort of, be drunk or using and just not be seen by certain people. I mean,
Okay.
everybody at the time drank,
Yeah, yeah. He is so Errol Flynn looking in those early years. And
Yeah.
it is jarring to even see him 10 years later. Now, he was in a relationship, many people don't even talk about this, although it's in books, to Norma McCarty, where they
Yeah.
got married.
Yeah.
Was that was he looking at McCarty, who also had children, as a way of getting into the family he so desperately wanted with Dolores Fuller, do you think?
Yeah, I really think, that I really believe that he wanted to be married. I really know that just seems to be something that was super duper important for him at that time in his life. He's like, it's got to happen now, he seemed really urgent about it. Otherwise, I don't think he would have married McCarty so suddenly, or even Kathy Wood for that matter, which was extremely sudden, if you ask me. But so yeah, I think that he's like, oh, she's in the business, I'm in the business. He was looking for that kind of dream power couple kind of thing, and I think that he saw some potential with McCarty there.
But there was also evasion, right?
Yeah.
Prior to that. What
Oh
was the big evasion? She didn't.
yeah. I'm like, how do you not know? I mean, if this cross dressing thing was like actually a thing, and I actually have some doubts about like to what extent Ed Wood was into that. I'm not convinced it was as pervasive as people want to think. They want Ed Wood to be a transvestite, and I'm not 100% convinced that that's who he was. I think it's something that he pulled out of the box every now and again to be entertaining, to be shocking, and to get attention. But I'm not convinced that it was something that was a deep part of him.
Well, that's interesting because even though their relationship like broke up, she's still in Plan 9 from outer space, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
She's still working with him.
Yes.
You would think something that traumatic might have brought them apart, not even want to talk to each other or something.
Yeah. Getting separated is huge.
Yeah, let's get into the Baptist now.
Okay.
So Ed Wood meets J. Edwards Reynolds, who, after reading your book, I think J. Edwards Reynolds has been one of the most misunderstood person in history. But so tell us how Ed got involved with the Baptists.
Yeah. So he had married Kathy Wood by this point, and he had been rooming with various people that you will end up seeing in his films. And and then they move into the Mariposa apartments, and the on-site manager for those apartments was J. Edward Reynolds, who happened to be a recovering alcoholic and a Baptist, a Southern Baptist, who was a deacon in his church. And he had come out to Hollywood to also make movies. And so I can just imagine what it was like for the two of these to meet. You know, they're just having some casual chit chat around the apartments. And next thing you know, they're like, we're going to make movies together. You know, I can just imagine the energy and how thrilled they both were.
Do you think that Ed Wood had been around the block already, okay, him into movie making?
Yes.
I just wonder if Ed really believed the pitch that you make this movie, you can make 10 or 20 movies about the Bible or something, all right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think Ed continued to aim for a goal to where he could be profitable. So you know, Arkoff and the folks that would go on to make AIP, they were already making kind of a steady progress in terms of building an actual business. And I think Ed really desired that, really wanted that stability and that profitability, and believed that if I just keep going, eventually I'll get there. You know, so I think he believed it to a point. Yeah. Did he also have to lie to himself a lot? Probably.
Because there's no foundation here, and you talk about this in your book. Here's Ed Wood getting all the money from the Baptists,
Yeah.
and but he can make this film, but he has no way of distributing it. All right, there's no, and I don't understand sometimes of how, they must have been totally divorced, not totally, but somewhat divorced from reality. The people like Hugh and others who put all this money in without ever thinking about how they were ever going to get it in theaters. Because there's more to life than the Rialto, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so folks like, you know, Arkoff and Nicholson, they had worked in the industry before. And so they had connections and they had an understanding of how the game works. Ed did not, you know, and Ed had met some independent, you know, filmmakers and distributors and was able to make some films for them. Great, awesome. But he also had an experience, especially with Bride of the Monster, where like nobody commissioned this film. I don't know what I'm going to do with it once it's done, you know. And so it was kind of a wing and a prayer kind of thing, and that it would actually get sold, which it did, thankfully, at the end, thanks to Arkoff, interestingly enough. But then Plan 9 from Outer Space, you know, so he's talking with Reynolds, and Reynolds happened to be involved with some people who also had some experience in the movie industry, the independent movie industry, particularly the owner of the Carlton Theater, who had been involved with.
I said Rialto. I meant Carlton. I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you know, this theater owner had already invested in a couple of movies to be made under the assumption that, oh, you know, these independent theaters, which were just coming to the scene at the time, would play our film because they don't want to pay the big studio prices or whatever. And the truth is that that's not what was going to happen, you know, because again, nobody had the connections to actually talk to all of these theater owners to actually sell the film. So it's a great McAleenan plan was great in theory, but in practice it just did not work. And it actually failed after McAleen's film The Peacemaker, which came out just a year before. So
You
um,
know, how how many people actually got baptized in their lore? You know, if you see the movie, you see a whole bunch of people that really didn't, right?
yeah, yeah, I think that's an important question. I think we can say for certain, for absolute certain, that Conrad Brooks did. Tor Johnson, Ed Wood, and Tor Johnson's family, so his wife Greta and their son Carl, were also baptized. Beyond that, all we have are anecdotes and maybes. There's no documentation that exists anymore of any other baptism.
That's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about J. Edward Reynolds because when this thing didn't work out, you
Yeah,
had this movie. The funny thing is, you had some stars in it. You had Gregory Walcott, and it was very interesting reading your book, learning about his evangelical zeal and things like that. All right.
yeah,
And one of the fun things I have in life is finding a Gregory Walcott film on TV way past Plan 9.
yeah,
And he made some spaghetti westerns even, you know that?
yeah.
The guy.
Really?
But yeah, what's it called? It's called a Man of the East. You might want to watch it sometime. It's generally
Okay.
you can find it for free. I think it's Man of the East. Double check that. It's a Terrence Hill. My wife grew up loving Terrence Hill movies.
Okay.
What you know about Terrence, if you don't know who Terrence Hill is, just look for the guy with the blue eyes in a Western film.
Nice.
But anyways, okay, he had Gregory Walcott, who did it for his church, essentially, right?
Yes.
And but you had people like Lyle Talbot. You
Yeah.
had all these old Western stars and things like that, and you had his troupe. But the film just didn't do it. You know, it we love it today, but I can imagine trying to watch it if you're a distributor looking at this film and thinking, what can I do with this? You know, and
Yeah.
and I found it very interesting that you can tell us about how grave robbers from outer space became Plan 9 because most people don't know this story. All right.
Yeah. You know, to be honest with you, the Baptists get a bad rap. J. Edward Reynolds gets a bad rap as being, just super awful to Ed. But the truth of the matter is, if it weren't for J. Edward Reynolds and for the Baptists, we would not have seen Plan 9 from outer space, I believe, because J. Edward Reynolds literally shouldered the entire burden for getting that film distributed. I mean, he literally gave his life for this
He
film.
died. He died
He
of a heart
literally
attack.
died.
It was probably stress related, right?
It's all stress related. That's right. I mean, he died of a heart attack trying to get this movie distributed. And mostly, for him, it was a source of deep shame and so forth because he had made all of these boasts within his denomination about the great things that are going to happen. When we make 12 of these films. There's actually he actually spoke to I can't remember the name of the magazine now, but a Hollywood Reporter maybe. He spoke to them and said, this is the day that Plan 9 was beginning to shoot. He's like, we're going to make 12 of these horror movies. And I'm like, really? Wow. He said that on the record, and then to have all of this trouble with this one film, it was too much for him, and he died of stress-related heart attack. Yeah,
Well, he went to New York trying to sell it, right?
he did. He went to New York. He actually ended up having to quit his day job as an electronics salesman in order to, because he was taking off so much work that I just can't do this. And they actually moved into the Carlton Theater and took that over and started renting it out in order to kind of make ends meet because he had to quit his day job so that he could finish trying to get this film sold and still maintain, of course, his status in the church, which is not easy to do either.
And you write about how Distributors Corporation of America, which
Yeah,
was already on its last legs,
it was
decided to pick this up, and Hal Roach is involved somehow too in all this stuff. And so he got a little bit of money. I guess some people got paid back,
a
but
little bit.
then once he died, the whole idea of getting money went away, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's my understanding that, you know, he had initially consulted an attorney, an entertainment lawyer, to help kind of make some connections to get that film sold. But attorneys are expensive, and money is not what he had. So he ended up doing a lot of the business dealings himself. And I think what that ended up doing, it was actually, he got it way over his head with that particular deal, and ended up not leaving any trace, any documentation, any, nobody to take over his place if he were to die, that sort of thing. I'm sure he wasn't planning to die, but uh,
Yeah.
he had no backup plan. He had no partner, nobody to, to carry, take over the reins when he passed. So it kind of got lost in the wash, and DCA is like, well, too bad. All right. I'm actually not entirely convinced that there was going to be more money coming. I think that what he got at the beginning was all he was going to get. That little bit of money was it, because frankly, it's not a great movie. I think we all just need to be honest about that. It's not that great a movie. At least he got something that he could go back to his investors with and say, here, hopefully if some, miracle happens and it plays in a ton of theaters, maybe we'll get a little bit more. But that's really all he had.
Tell us who determined the title Plan 9 from Outer Space, because that would surprise a lot of people. All right. Who made that determination?
Yeah, everybody, of course, if you read Nightmare of Ecstasy, Rudolph Gray's book, everybody makes it sound like, uh, Edward, the Baptist, man, we're trying to deal with some sort of blasphemy that grave robbers, implied. And that's just not true. If you look at the poster artwork, if you look at the all of the marketing materials from very early on, actually, it's all geared toward the science fiction aspect instead of the horror aspect of the film. And so it was changed to Plan 9 from Outer Space simply for marketing purposes. They wanted to go.
Yeah, and that's it. That really, really got me when I read that, because I hadn't heard that before. But it makes perfect sense. Because
until
Ed
you
Wood
have
would tell
Dracula,
people
until you
what?
have Dracula in a cemetery, then it gets kind of weird. But yeah,
That's the surrealism right there.
it is.
So Ed Wood still maintained a good relationship with the Baptists even after the failure of this film for a while, right?
He did for several years, actually. Um, if we all believe the story that he sold his rights to the film for $1, which you get out of Nightmare of Ecstasy, um, then why would he continue to be involved with the Baptists if there was no business to be conducted anymore? They certainly weren't inviting him back to make more films, right? I kind of wanted to see though what his Billy Sunday movie would have been like, but we never got to see that. um, but yeah, he had stayed in the church because he had a very deep and meaningful pastoral relationship with Lynn Lemon. Yeah, that's right.
Tell us about Lynn Lemon a little bit. And Ed did gravitate toward his pulpit, right? More or less.
He did, absolutely. Yeah, I think out of all of the people that were involved from the Baptist church, I think Lynn Lemon was probably the most unassuming of them all. He definitely just had a genuine, sincere pastor's heart. He wasn't interested in the glitz, the glamour, the possibility of being a star or making movies. That's just not what he was into. And so, his dealings with Ed Wood were entirely pastoral from the very beginning. In fact, when Ed Wood said that he was going to join the Baptist Church, he didn't go to the First Baptist Church of Beverly Hills. He went. He drove 30 minutes to go to Lynn Lemon's church, and stayed there. And then when Lynn Lemon went to another congregation, Ed followed him. So
But you get the feeling that Ed was counseled by Lemon sometimes in a religious sense, spiritual sense, right?
yeah, Lynn Lemon is on record as saying as much. Actually, he did a wonderful interview with Wooly. I can't remember Wooly's first name, but he goes on record and saying, hey, Ed used to go with me up to my cabin, and we used to spend the day together. And I tried to, be his pastor and help him through his struggles, particularly with alcohol. So. Yeah.
These are the reason I like your book and the other books that have come out is they're providing us a context of Ed Wood's life,
Yeah.
that you didn't get from Nightmare of Ecstasy and other things. And so you understand here was a guy that still was seeking spiritual sustenance, at
Yeah.
least into the early 1960s.
Yes.
And let me go back a teeny bit. He makes a movie. He makes well. Let's talk about Night of the Ghouls.
Yeah.
That's a film that couldn't even get to the extent that Plan 9 got. And
Right.
he had a lot of investors.
Yes.
Um, what must have that done to him, I think.
That was probably the most, yeah, I mean, I think was glad that Plan 9 was able to get out there. That had to be a huge relief to him, even if he didn't make something on it.
Yeah.
Like his name's on it, he can add it to his resume. He couldn't really do that with Night of the Ghouls, because it sat, in a lab, in a developer's shelf until like the early 80s, long after he was dead. Um, you know,
But there were other things too that there were copies of that flitting around.
yeah,
He just
it,
didn't have the money to do anything with it, right?
right. I think he tried. I think there must have been a couple of prints made. It seems that he was able to actually afford and get out of the shop, as it were. And they ended up because he was trying to get it out there. It just never made it because I'm sure you've watched it. It's a very odd movie. Um, I
Yeah,
remember,
I mean, the thing
yeah,
about Ed Wood is he's you can't replicate him, okay, for good or bad. And so I can watch that movie 50 times, okay, because it's just so bizarre. But I
yes,
want to get back to this Plan 9, not Plan 9, Night of the Ghouls failure. There are some letters, after reading your book, they seem more plaintive. In Nightmare of Ecstasy, he's writing to Valda Hansen, I think it was, or somebody else, and he's talking about how he wants to change all the stuff in Night of the Ghouls. And you mentioned that too.
yeah,
And he's not going to let anybody down. He says, I've never let anybody down. I'm going to get this film out. Of course, that didn't happen. And then there's an old cult movies magazine I was reading where Fred Olen Ray
yeah.
um, asked Ed Wood some questions. And one was, what about Night of the Ghouls? And Ed Wood's answer was, you got me.
Oh,
Um, Even though he clearly knew what had happened to it, right?
yeah.
So I guess the question I'm asking you was that maybe the trigger soul thing that really hurt him?
I think so. I mean, even though Plan 9 was distributed, it didn't do for him what I think he had hoped it did, which was to further his career and have something a little more stable and some continuity. So he's making Night of the Ghouls kind of piecemeal with some random friends that he's making, and like on the weekends or whatever. Bit by bit, and he's even cobbling some old stuff into it, to make it feature length. And then so it's like a desperation that finally just leaves him hanging. Like I can't do anything with this film. It's the last thing I've got. Eventually though, he did get sort of picked up by some independents, but not to the degree that he was hoping.
The, we're talking about a spirituality, and the adversary can really get to us if we have a lot of despair and disappointment.
Yes.
And so Wood makes the Sinister Urge, but that's basically a company film, all right.
Yeah.
But he got to use some of his stuff he made in Hellborn in it, I guess.
Hmm.
And then we don't see much of Ed Wood. And you talk in your book about how some of his acquaintances, like Conrad Brooks and others, had decided to go into the world and try to make their living outside of Hollywood. All right,
Yeah.
but Wood never seemed to want to do that. Except he did do some things. He worked for this aero something company
Automatic.
government thing, yeah,
Yeah.
aeronautics, and he also wrote speeches, which this cracks me up. I'd love to read some of those speeches if we could find
Yeah.
them for Sam Yorty. I'm a Southern California kid, all right, so yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Was that an attempt, in your opinion, to maybe try to get away from filmmaking and he just wasn't able to do it? I'm just wondering.
No, actually, I see that as very much trying to stay in the industry as much as possible. Um, and so it's not making movies, but at least he's contributing something. So he is writing and directing, these technical pieces, which he apparently really enjoyed, and got a lot out of, in terms of satisfaction. The Sam Yorty thing, he doesn't really say much about that, like, oh yeah, I did it. But there's really no indication if it was something he enjoyed or what. So you can see him making these decisions, his career decisions and choices that are slowly, oh, I'm just doing this because I'm trying to stay in the industry, and eventually, that led him to eventually make pornography because he's still in the industry, right?
Yeah, and then you talk about the consequences of doing that.
Yeah.
It changed from I'm still in the industry to, well, I'm paying my bills. But if I want to get back into the industry the way I want to, that door is closed now, which I think is so sad,
Yeah, yeah, and I think he, and you can see the cry for help through all of that. Oh, I'm just doing this until I get enough whatever to make a legitimate picture. And of course, every addict and every person that's not going to actually do that always tries to convince themselves and other people that that's what's happening. Oh, it's just temporary. I can stop it at any time. But the truth is, he couldn't. Neither the drinking nor the pornography. Once that ship, went, that there was no turning back, and because he
Okay.
essentially tarnished his name to a degree that nobody would touch him.
Okay, I want to talk about a subject that might be a little controversial,
Yeah,
and I don't mean it to be, but he married Kathy Wood, all right?
yeah.
And they kind of met at tell me, it was a kind of church, but it was also kind of a mind something. Tell us about where they met at.
Yeah, science of the mind.
Science.
You see, I think the modern version of this would be Joel Osteen, if that helps.
Okay.
A kind of a prosperity gospel. If you believe it, it's true. Um, about yourself, and you can claim your blessings and all this other stuff. And it's what Dr. William James described in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experiences, is a healthy-minded religion. Um, and so that was, I think, Ed trying to be positive again, trying to claim his blessings. And if I just claim it and say it, that it's going to somehow be true. Of course, it did not. So apparently, Kathy went to that also at the Wiltern, and they saw each other there a couple times maybe, and then eventually met in a bar.
Yeah, and I think she says that I saw a guy crying, or something like that, and I've always been a sucker for a guy crying. Now, she didn't seem to have, I'm not saying she wasn't a Christian, but she didn't seem to have his desire to like be affiliated with the church. Is that fair to say?
I think that's probably pretty accurate, at least during that time in her life. From the conversations and things that exchanges I've had with Bob Blackburn, I would say that might have actually changed in her latter years.
And so, getting into the mid 60s, where he's written some screenplays, for Shotgun Wedding, which, by the way, is a G-rated movie, people, okay, just so you know.
Is it
I've
really?
seen it. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
And another one about two kids that get married that has Harold Lloyd Jr. and I can't remember the name. But he's
Young
doing this under pseudonyms and things like that.
Yeah.
But
Is that Young Marrieds or Married Too Young?
the Married Too Young, that's it, yeah. So he makes this decision to hang out with Stephen Apostoloff, okay?
Yeah.
And that's probably the seminal point in his life, don't you think? When because these are not hardcore, but they're adult features.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I think if you again reference back to that time period through Ed's memoir Hollywood Rat Race, you'll find, in my opinion, and I talk about this in the book, that Ed, he's like, I don't want to make sex movies. The sex has to move the plot along, otherwise what's the point? It's not to him entertainment.
well, that's a rationalization, isn't it, more or less?
It very well could be. as he found himself deeper and deeper into that particular genre, both writing as well as making these screenplays. But then you hear Apostolov's account that says, Ed never really wrote this porn part. He's like, he would write the story and then I would insert some dry humping or something in there, to make it, the kind of film that people will pay to see.
Have you read the book Dad Wrote Dirty Movies?
Most of it, yes.
Because I think Ed was fooling himself a lot of times, all right, to be honest.
Yes.
And it's really a sad scene where, in the early 70s, where Ed says, I want to go to this party because I know I'm going to get drunk out of my mind, all right?
Yeah.
And I see a picture of Ed at the party, and I see somebody who's just, nobody respects him anymore. And that really hurts to look at that.
Yes.
Something like that. And it just seems like you hit a slide that just goes down, okay, from that point. And Ed had these, every one of us are sinners. We all sin, okay? But Ed, the first time with Apostolov, he stole all those stills, right, to write the book. And it just breaks my heart to think about the things he did that would make it more people turn away from him.
Yes.
And everything. And
especially the people that were in a lot of ways trying to help him.
Yeah.
But that's how addiction works. I don't know if you know anybody that has addiction issues, but an addict just wants whatever it is they're addicted to. In this case, Ed's addiction of choice was alcohol. And he wanted it so badly that that was his focus. So all the manipulation, all of the rationalizing was, how do I keep myself in a place where I can continue to drink?
So Ed Wood's alcoholism is generally considered a disease, right?
Yes.
I mean, people like to scorn at it, and you like to say, why do you have to do that?
I don't think it had any control.
Yeah, it's a disease. It has to be. And he didn't have anybody to help treat him, right?
No.
Kathy deserves a lot of credit for carrying on good secretarial jobs for years, but eventually she sort of succumbed to that too, didn't she?
She did.
At one point, yeah. There's also a scene in Apostolov's book where Ed sold the Nightmare of, no, not Nightmare of Ecstasy, the book of the movie Apostolov made for over like $1,500.
Yeah.
And he dances a little jig in the office. But once again, it gets to me thinking he stole the photos to do that.
Yeah, he
and
did.
Of course, that killed the relationship for several years.
Yes.
With, I'm not too impressed with much of any of Wood's pornography. I think Take It Out and Trade is interesting, but still a pretty squalid film. But what's interesting is what?
Yeah. Oh, that was hard to watch. I mean, I just fast forwarded through all the ridiculousness, but I mean.
I'll tell you what's hard to watch is The Love Feast. All right, that's hard to watch.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, as soon as I saw Ed's whitey tighties, I'm like, yeah, I can't watch this.
Yeah. Take It Out and Trade is not a good movie, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of interesting. It's fun to see Duke Moore in a movie, all right?
Yes.
But, God, I lost my train of thought. I need to stop it. Okay, now we'll get to the fact where he starts to write, okay? And his ability to write, even when completely drunk, is amazing all this time. But I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think in his writing, even if it's the subject matter, there's morality in there, right? Often.
There is. Ed always somehow managed to work out his moral tendencies, and I think it has a lot to do with his own inner conflict. Because I actually don't believe that Ed enjoyed being the alcoholic, if that makes sense to you, or the porn writer. And I think that just absolutely killed his spirit. And so he tried to work through some of that through his writing as much as he could,
Well, I read some of the stories you mentioned in the book. The one about the chaplain in the field who just sort of almost goes crazy and things like that.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, Ed was writing as much from popular fiction as he was from real experience, because I don't think he experienced that in war, did he? But he
Well,
is what?
oh, I was gonna say, just being in the army myself or whatever, I kind of I think I understand that story maybe a little bit differently than some people. When you're faced in a military situation, uh, people in the military are highly religious. They're highly religious, and it might not be in the Judeo-Christian God that they're religious about or toward, but they are extremely religious. And I think Ed really understood that and tried to put that into a story. And I appreciated that story, actually.
It was a great story. It
Yeah.
was very, I mean, it conveyed scenes that I had never even contemplated about the military being in a war. But yeah, he's trying, I think, to practice his Christianity, to practice his spirituality in his writing.
Yes.
And you even see it in books like Let Me Die in Drag and things like that,
Yes.
where they are basically moral tales.
Yes.
And I really appreciate Bob Blackburn getting all these stories out,
Yes.
because they're quite interesting. And otherwise, they would have just died. No one would be,
Yeah.
and everything. And he had to comb through tons and tons of things.
I know.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the people
Yeah.
when Ed passed away.
Yeah.
Um, you write, and it's depressing, that basically it was Peter Coe or nobody, right, to
Mm-hmm.
help him. And
Mm-hmm.
that's quite, um, boy, I just feel like I can imagine them out on the street or something like that. Do you think that some of the people that might have been his friends might not have had the ability to help him at the time?
Well, I think um, you know his relationship with a lot of people from his past, from his more affluent past, had been kind of alienated, and they'd been manipulated so many times regarding the addiction that they're just like, there's nothing I can do for you anymore. I'm not going to enable this anymore. Dudley Manlove is a good example of that. Conrad Brooks maybe somewhere similar to that as well. But a lot of these people just didn't want to enable him anymore, and they couldn't stand the erratic behavior. Addicts, when it's super progressed, get really if you don't give me what I want, they'll turn on you like so fast. And I think they were just to the point where, like, I can't deal with you anymore, and they just pushed Ed away because of the manipulation.
I can't remember if it was Bob Kramer or the author of the Bela Lugosi films. I have it here, but my Richard something. My eyes are too.
Yeah.
One of them talks about Nightmare of Ecstasy, about interviewing Ed for
Yeah.
money, and Ed just loses it at the end of the interview, and he has to like run out of the house. The interviewer, he says
Yes.
something like, "Guess I'll see you now, okay?"
Isn't that
And is
Bob
that
Primer? Yeah.
I think it was Bob Kramer. In fact,
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to Kramer's updated biography
Me too.
of Bela Lugosi, because it's going to have so many pages about Ed Wood, which will
Yes.
be great.
Yes.
Um, but you write about how Kathy did not like Conrad much and Dudley much. They didn't get invited. And do you think it was because of their efforts to try to reform them?
I think that's part of it. I think, given that she was an addict at the time as well, they were. I mean, it was a really horrible circumstance. They were both heavy drinkers. I mean, you can hear about the fights and stuff that they had, the physical altercations. So things were just not good in that household, and so I imagine that she treated them the same way that Ed would. And so when Ed died, she just looked at that, like, part of it, has to do, like, wow, they were telling the truth, but at the same time, she's still drunk. She's still, under the influence of her addiction, and still hates those people because they didn't give them what they wanted at the time, which was booze. you know, um, that's what I think was happening there.
Now you have Peter Coe, you have Paul Marco there, and Paul Marco always seemed to me a bit of a dysfunctional person.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there was some kind of Hey, you're one of us, more or less. Okay, we both all know what you're going through. I don't know. Peter Coe. I don't know if you read a Cult Movies article where his ex-wife wrote
Mm,
about time with Ed,
yeah.
and Coe sort of seemed to be very condescending of Ed. Liked him, but sort of like would tell his wife, sort of speak disparagingly of him. And I
Oh,
wonder if Coe saw himself as sort of a benefactor or something, to him, or
yeah. Uh, if I remember correctly, Peter Coe was also an
an
addict.
alcoholic.
Yeah. And so there's kind of a strange camaraderie between alcoholics. Um, I don't know, the things specifically that Peter Coe said to Ed or about Ed. But I think that in order to invite somebody into your home to stay, that actually, that's a big deal. You don't do that for no reason. I mean,
No,
Peter.
it's definitely a very Christian act to do
Yeah,
that for him.
yeah. I don't know if he saw them as a benefactor. I think it was like this is what friends do. This is what fellow alcoholics do.
Well, I'm glad he had him. Um,
I'm
so
glad he
the
did.
last thing,
Yeah, me too.
and she didn't like Stephen Apostolov, and and what was the difference in your opinion between based on your research, working for Stephen Apostolov and working for Bernie Bloom in those last days?
Yeah. Bernie Bloom was trying to get what he could. He could just pump Ed for whatever, for his own benefit, really. But I think the work that Ed was doing for Stephen Apostolov, that to me was another act of kindness. Because we have all of these unproduced scripts, which would be interesting to
Which
read.
he bought, right? He bought for him, right?
He did. He bought them.
Yeah.
Did he ever intend to produce them? I don't know. Probably not. Who knows? I think he took the ones that he thought, oh, I can make something out of this. I can make a good film out of this. And he used those. But I think otherwise he bought a lot of those. It's kind of like when you see a person on the side of the road, a poor person on the side of the road selling eggs for $2 an egg. Obviously, you can go somewhere else and get an entire dozen of eggs for $2, but you buy the $2 egg because it's a way of giving charity with dignity. And I think that's what was happening there. Charity with
I
dignity.
got that impression from your book about Apostolov.
Yeah.
It increased my respect for him from
Yeah.
reading your book. And once again, I think it goes to Kathy Wood's dislike of him because he may have been encouraging Ed to try to be something different, than what he was right now.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, Apostolov even tried to give Ed a chance to act again. Well, he
Yeah.
did in one movie, which is probably the only decent one he made, called Fugitive Girls. But that last film, Hot Ice or something, Ed was supposed to be in it, right? But just too
He was
drunk
supposed
to
to
do it.
have a kind of a walk-on role. I don't believe it was
Yeah.
supposed to have any lines or whatever, but Ed showed up drunk and couldn't. He, Apostolov would like, no, 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 and so Apostolov's son ended up taking the role.
Now, I've always been fascinated by David Demering doing the memorial service for Ed and
Yes.
the pictures because he was in Plan 9, he's in Night of the Ghouls, but then he kind of disappears from Ed's life of any kind recorded now. Uh, what did you think of his eulogy? You go into it in great detail in the book.
Yeah, it was really cool to find that on the auction site or whatever. I'm like, cool. This is really interesting to see and to learn that David had gotten his mail order ordination. Was interesting also. Um, and yeah, the fact that he was choosing things though from a Methodist hymnal, which is again coming back to Ed's upbringing, was particularly fascinating to see. Oh yeah, I mean the eulogy is as good as you're going to get at a celebration of life, but it's not a sermon per se. So I'm not. So obviously, I don't believe that David Demering had any sort of theological education or even maybe huge understanding about what he was doing. I would actually like to know more about what prompted him to go that route of the mail order ordination. Maybe it was just a way to make money, because I think once you get that, you're able to perform certain services for people. Maybe that was a way to make money. I don't know.
It seems like he took it seriously enough to do some research, right?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, he didn't
And
live very long. He didn't live very long after that. I'd love to know more about his life, though. I really would. That would be
yeah,
fascinating.
I think he lived like what 2 more years. Yeah.
He died at a younger age than Ed Wood. He
Yeah,
did.
yeah, 1980. The only thing I know about David Demering, of course, he was in two Ed Wood films. He apparently made has an appearance, no speaking part in the movie Them, which is a popular film. I don't know if that's true. I've tried to watch that film to find him, and maybe he ended up on the cutting room floor. I don't know, but
Well, you know, Valda Hansen claimed to be in a lot of movies when she was alive, and they are a lot of people. I think in the pre-internet age could say a lot of things they wanted
yeah,
to.
yes,
I mean, Kathy Wood honestly believed that Ed fought in heavy combat
yeah.
in World War II. I mean, it would take a psychologist to understand why people want to do those kind of things, you know. But it's now in your last chapter, you talk about Ed Wood's spirituality through his life and the commitments he made, and then talk about how his spirit was received by God. And so I'd like to know a little bit about your theology about a person who, even though they live a flawed life, has made these commitments and what kind of mercy God might show them.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean, you know, he was baptized in an Anglican denomination, the Methodist Church. So he was baptized as a baby. So in you know, Protestantism, uh, we don't believe, generally speaking, and the Catholics don't really believe this either, but that God is making a choice for you. And it's not our choice. This is why the babies are baptized. Um, and so it's more about God's commitment to you than it is to about our commitment and faithfulness. So when we're unfaithful, God is always faithful, right? His mercy and kindness are forever. And so, you know, Ed clearly struggled in his life with a lot of different things, and he made a lot of sad choices, particularly with pornography and alcohol. But I think in the end, you know, especially the words and things that David Demering chose, I think are really say the most. And that is that, you know, we're not commending ourselves to ourselves at the end of the day, you know, even though so we make choices, we sin, right? We sin every day in one way or the other. But at the end of the day, you know, God has already made a choice for us, and that is to forgive us our sins through Jesus. And I actually find myself quite proud, if I can be that, to say that, you know, Ed Wood is a saint in Christ. And I actually look forward to seeing him around the throne of God. I think that'll be amazing time, you know, when we're all joined together. Because I do honestly believe that and then I believe that Ed believed this. You know, maybe he struggled believing it in the latter years of his life, but I believe that he believed and was captured by the grace of God. You know, the Baptists were like, "Oh, you're not one of us," you know, but I don't believe that's true. I think his relationship with Lynn Lemon was definitely one of those, you know, more intense moments. You know, a lot of lament, obviously, but where he tried really hard to reconnect with his spirituality. He even tried to do it in his short fiction in the 70s, you know, at times, because you know, that's not something that you lose. So, you know, you talk about having a relationship with God. Well, yeah, you know, and some days, you know, aren't great. Sometimes our relationship with God isn't great, and sometimes it's really bad. But thankfully, through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, you know, our sins are forgiven, and it's going to ultimately be, you know, we're riding in on His coattails, so to speak. I guess that's my summary of the gospel.
No, that's what I get from your book, and I agree with you. And I,
Yeah,
I like the fact that you brought up the point that Ed Wood was always writing until the end. I mean,
yeah,
he never stopped writing, and that seems to me to indicate that the dream was still there.
yeah,
You know, he wanted to keep writing, and I interviewed somebody who talked about the Frank Leahy screenplay,
Yeah.
and here's Ed Wood in the in the 70s when he's ill,
Yeah.
doing research about football. So I
No.
mean, he's he's still trying to do it, and I don't know if this is accurate, but in Nightmare of Ecstasy they have pages of what apparently the last thing Ed Wood ever wrote.
Yeah.
Now that's based on whoever told him the source, but it's just a story about a guy somewhere in a cabin or something. I'm thinking, there's Ed Wood writing till the end.
Yes.
And I think if you want to create, you still have a lot of virtue and positivity in your life.
Yeah.
Um,
I think Ed was cognizant that God gave him a gift, and we can see how that gift was twisted, especially in his later life. We also see toward the end there little indications that the gift is still there, and Ed put it to some very good use, writing some of those stories and some of those things in his latter days. So,
do you think, well, I asked this to everybody I talked to, do
oh yeah.
you ever think we'll find Lugosi post-mortem?
I honestly believe that a manuscript still exists.
Yeah, and you mentioned you think it might be with Lugosi Jr., right?
I've heard that from different places, and I'm not willing to say that it doesn't. It just sounds so plausible and so Bella Junior's esque
It
to
it doesn't it doesn't seem like something he'd leave behind if it was there, you know.
right.
That's although other people I've talked to said, nah, it's not there. But that's just their opinion too. All
Yeah.
right. Be fun to have it. Anything more you think we should talk about this subject?
That's a good question. I don't know. I just hope that some people can get some good and some hope out of this book, actually, because all of the people that appeared in Ed Wood's movies were working actors, working writers, working directors, people who just wanted to have an impact, and somehow, some way, Ed Wood managed to have an impact on a lot of people, some positive, some negative, but definitely a lot of positive, especially as we think about today, people making movies on their phones and things like that. To me, Ed Wood can still be a source of inspiration, even though some things weren't quite right in his career and his life. Yeah, that's
You know,
about
it's
it.
interesting. A lot of people denigrated Ed Wood when he was alive, and then they made a lot of money off him long after he was dead.
Yeah.
So this is the book, and Drown the Devil, a spiritual biography of Ed Wood, Bear Manor Media. We're going to put links to Bear Manor Media and Amazon with the podcast. It's an excellent read, and I'm going to go through my spiel now. We're Plan 9 Crunch. Plan 9 Crunch at YouTube. Give us a subscribe. Plan 9 Crunch at TikTok. Plan 9 Crunch podcast and blog at Facebook. And our blog is plan9crunch.com, which has a lot of Ed Wood stuff on. And that's a wrap.